Hello, and welcome in GoDigiBioS podcast. It's our third series of the GoDigiBioS Talks. Today we have a very special guest, Rosa from Minkadev. Hello, Rosa.
Hello, Alexander. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Um, Rosa, may I ask you to have a brief introduction of yourself and Minkadev, what you do as an organization, and what are your roles in the GoDigiBioS?
Of course. So my name is Rosa Cisneros. I'm working in Minkadev. I'm a sustainability consultant and a project manager there, where I'm working with governance and the stakeholder engagement on complex territorial contexts. So Minkadev, we are a sustainability consultancy where we help organizations bridging between natural capital and economic flag.
Okay, that's great. Thanks so much for introduction. And today we have a very interesting and special topic for the podcast because today we will be talking about very important part of the urban and peri-urban natural ecosystems. We're going to talk about wetlands, their roles in the urban environment, their roles for citizens, and of course their roles in sustaining biodiversity of the peri-urban areas. And Rosa, let's try to define what wetland is, because when we talk about wetlands, people may imagine very different pictures in their mind, right? So is it just the swamps or what can it be? What's the definition of wetland?
Yes, of course. Actually, that's a very common misconception that we have. We hear wetlands, and the immediate picture that we got in our head is just like swamps or muddy areas. But in practice, they are like much more diverse and in many ways more subtle. Wetlands are areas where the water is present, of course, either permanently or seasonally. And that presence of water shapes the soil, the vegetation, and entire ecosystem. This include marshes, lagoons, river floodplains, estuaries, peatlands, coastal submarshes, among others. No? And what makes them very particularly interesting is that they exist in a boundary between land and water. And those transition spaces have a lot of ecological processes happening there. Like they are very dynamic, they are constantly adapting, and at the same time, they are very sensitive to changes on how we use the land. You know? So for in that sense, wetlands are not just a marginal space, they are more like living interfaces, no? That help maintain balance across ecosystems.
All right, great. And in the whole picture of natural ecosystems, what are actually the role of the wetlands?
Uh, they they actually have played several roles that are really essential, even for nature and also for people. When we look at ecosystems as an interconnected systems, wetlands, they have very roles that are both visible and sometimes they're very underestimated. One of the most documented functions that we know is the water regulations. Wetlands act almost as natural sponges. So they absorb the water during the heavy rainfall and release it more gradually during the rest of the dry seasons. This helps to reduce flood risks and maintain a more stable river flow. In many regions, they also contribute to groundwater recharge, which is directly linked to drinking water and agriculture. They also function as natural filtration systems. As water moves through the wetlands, sediments, nutrients, and pollutants are retained by soils and vegetations. So this process improves the water quality before it reaches to rivers, lakes, or other coastal areas. No? And from a climate perspective, the evidence is quite strong, especially in the case of the peatlands. Although they only cover around like the 3% of the earth land surface, they could store up to 30% of the carbon found in the soils globally. So that gives us a clear indication of their role in climate regulation. And in terms of biodiversity, they're also quite huge. They're one of the most productive ecosystems around. They hold almost the 40% of the world species depending on the habitat and reproduction. And this includes fish, amphibians, migratory birds, insects that rely on those ecosystems across continents. And also beyond ecology, wetlands also sustain livelihoods. It is estimated that 1 billion people depend on wetlands for food production, particularly for fisheries, rice cultivation, as well for cultural and recreational activities. We don't have to forget that also wetlands are very highly productive agricultural areas. So when wetlands are degraded or lost, what we are really losing are like systems that provide multiple services at once, services that are like often very complex and costly to replace artificially.
Well, that sounds like indeed, a lot of roles in sustaining natural ecosystems. It's quite a crucial element. Great, but let's take a look on what is going on in Europe with the wetlands. While preparing this podcast, I just have found some statistics about the shortages, about the dynamic of the presence of the wetlands across the European areas. So according to the Eurostat, land cover statistics from 2015, wetlands in the EU covered almost 73,000 square kilometers, which amounted to about 1.7% of total EU land area at that time. And Ireland had the highest share, by the way, of the land as a wetland, 5.6%, followed by Sweden, 5.4%, and Finland, around 5%. The smallest shares were in countries like Slovakia, Slovenia, Cyprus, Italy, and Spain. Well, probably in this case due to the climatic conditions. Um, and according to uh, Eurostat, actually, approximately 70% of all historic European wetlands have been lost over the last century due to the drainage for agriculture, urban development, and other land use changes. That was the research of the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. But that's the question. Why actually the humans and within the human activity, why do we destroy the wetlands so aggressively in Europe past last 100 years, as statistics shares? What are abundant narratives about this, Rosa?
Sure. So that's actually a very important question because wetlands have not disappeared by accident. Uh, Unfortunately, their loss has been very much driven by specific ideas on what we define as land as valuable and how landscapes should be used. Especially how societies have historically defined what is useful and productive. So for a long time, wetlands were seen as unproductive or even risky areas, usually associated with flooding or disease. So draining was actually what was considered a way to improve the land, and then make it more suitable for agricultural or urban development. And also, many wetlands are located in very flat, fertile areas, particularly the ones that are closest to river delta. So once drained, those lands became highly productive for agriculture, which also led to a large-scale transformation of the landscape, specifically during the 19th and the 20th century. At the same time, infrastructure, cities tend to grow, especially closer to in the same areas, where it's near water, accessible terrain. So wetlands were often covered into transport systems, industrial zones, urban land. So underlying all of this, there has also been a dominant idea that water should be controlled, channeled, contained, stabilized, rather than allowed to move more naturally, across landscapes. What we're seeing now is a gradual shift in that narrative. Increasingly, wetlands are being recognized now not as unused land, but as essential systems that support both ecosystems and economy. And this shift has also been reflected in policy frameworks such as Natura 2000 natural areas, which aim not to only protect species, but also to maintain and restore habitats.
All right. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And let's now talk more about actually scope of our project. So within our four of our tier labs, we also have transformative labs. We have also quite a few of territories with a wetlands. Well, obviously we may have a bit of wetlands in the Matosinhos in Portugal. We have wetlands in the coast of lovely Danube River in Rus in Bulgaria. But most of course, the biggest wetland in scope of our project is located in Delta Llobregat, in next to the Barcelona. And let's talk a bit about the what's going on there actually. Rosa, can you introduce to our listeners the case of Delta of the Llobregat River?
Of course. So the Delta del Llobregat, it's just located on the south of Barcelona city, where the river meets the Mediterranean Sea, and is one of the most relevant coastal wetland systems in Catalonia. Actually, it's the third more biggest one. And at the same time, is one of the most intensively used territories. So what makes this delta particularly interesting is the coexistence of multiple systems within a relatively very small area. We find natural spaces. Part of it is actually Natura 2000 network that supports important habitats and bird populations. At the same time, hosts major infrastructures. We have the Barcelona airport, the Prat of Llobregat. We have the Port of Barcelona, also other industrial zones, transport corridors, main highways, train lines. And also, in parallel, it is still remaining one of the highly productive agricultural areas in the zone, in the region. So we also host, the Delta also hosts the Parque Agrario de Baix Llobregat that plays a key role in supplying fresh goods to the metropolitan region. So rather than a single-use landscape, the Delta right now is a living system with biodiversity, food production, infrastructure, urban dynamics intersect, and this makes it a very relevant example on the type of balance that many territories are currently trying to navigate.
Well, that sounds like a lot of activity and a lot of conflict of interest between different stakeholders there. I may imagine what the clashes are there between the people who want to preserve biodiversity and the farmers, and obviously the stakeholders who want to enlarge the airport. But do you know actually the story of this area? What was there before the airport?
So the Delta has a really long story of transformations. It's been centuries, it has been a completely untouched landscape. But yeah, before the airport it was built, much of the Delta was already used for agriculture. Historically, this area was considered a wetland, lagoons, seasonal floodplains, but over the time, many of these wetlands were already drained and converted into farmland. The transformation started more or less around a century ago, especially during the 19th and 20th century. And later, as Barcelona expanded, infrastructure was needed. That's when the airport came into place. It was a really nice flat area where it has a possibility to have this such infrastructure there. So as I was saying, so the Delta right now we see today, it's just a result of a continuous process adaptation that has been changing and will continue changing.
All right, indeed, like in such hilly places, Barcelona, perhaps only one flat area around can be the delta of the river, which is indeed kind of perfect for airport building. But also such an area next to the river's delta usually has quite a rich soil, what also a lot of wetlands can characterize. I believe there is a quite intense interest from the agricultural stakeholders in this soil, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. So the delta areas typically they really have very fertile soils, and the delta of Llobregat it's actually a very good example of this. So over centuries, river deposits sediments rich in nutrients, which make the soils particularly suitable for agriculture. So this is one of the reasons that agriculture is still, until today, one of the main activities in the area. So we have the Parque Agrario Llobregat, which is one of the most important peri-urban agricultural areas in Catalonia, especially for its proximity to the city of Barcelona, and plays a key role supplying fresh vegetables and local produces to the metropolitan area. What makes this case particularly interesting is that agriculture here operates in very close to urban areas, major infrastructure, and also the natural areas. So farmers are also working in a highly dynamic environment where land availability is quite limited and the pressures are high. At the same time, agriculture it's closely linked to water management. So irrigation systems depend on grounded and surface water. Farmers are increasingly facing challenges related to water availability, water quality, and soil salinization. So Agricultural stakeholders have a really strong interest in the territory, not only because of the fertility of the soil, but also because their livelihoods depend on maintaining productive land under increasingly complex environmental or urban pressures. And that creates an important point. In places like Delta, biodiversity conservation and agriculture cannot be treated like separate issues. They are like deeply interconnected, and long-term sustainability depends on finding ways how they both can coexist.
Yeah, right. And well, across the Europe, actually, farmers sometimes quite radically see the environmental and pro-environmental initiatives, like environmental protection initiatives, which come in, for instance, from European Union, European Commission. So, what the reaction of the farmers on the pro-environmental initiatives in this area?
So it's true. In recent years, there has been increasing efforts to strengthen environmental protection in the Delta, particularly through the designation of and management of Natura 2000 and other conservation measures. For farmers and land managers, these initiatives can sometimes generate uncertainty. This is not necessary because they oppose to environmental protection, but because new conservation rules can affect how they can use the land, how the water is managed, and what type of activities they are allowed. At the same time, it's important to understand that the pressures affecting the delta are not coming from a single source. Like agriculture is just only one part of a much broader systems with many other actors. So one major pressure relates to water, for example. Water quality is affected by the nutrients, chemicals from multiple sources, while water availability is increasingly uncertain due to climate variability and competing demands. In coastal areas, salinization of soils and aquifers is also becoming a concern. Another important pressure comes from urban and infrastructure development. The delta is located next to a large metropolitan area, and this creates a continuous pressure on land availability and land use and planning. We also see pressures related to land use practice. For example, they might not be fully compatible with conservation objectives, sometimes refers as improper land uses. This can be informal land occupation, waste dumping, and other uses that degrade habitats over time. So because of all these overlapping pressures, reaction from farmers and other stakeholders are not uniform. Some stakeholders express concerns about restrictions or administrative complexity, while others recognize that protecting wetlands is essential for maintaining soil quality, water quality, availability, and long-term agricultural productivity. So what we observe in the delta is not simply a conflict between farmers and conservation. It's more a complex negotiation between environmental protection, agricultural livelihood, and urban development. And this is precisely why dialogue between stakeholders is so important in this type of landscape.
All right. That's indeed quite intense. And also the airport is which located there is also have its own interests and perspectives and vision about this area. So what about the airport stakeholders? What's their part of the story?
Yes, so the presence of the airport is closely linked to the geography of the region. Flat areas around Barcelona are relatively limited, so that does naturally offer those conditions, which makes them very attractive for infrastructure development. Over the time, proposals related to expanding this type of infrastructure have generated public debate. And this is something that we are not only seeing here, but across many other metropolitan regions, and a continuous effort to balance connectivity, economic activity, and environmental protection is over time. At the same time, the delta is not only an agricultural or ecological space, it's also a social space that people actively use and connect with. Many recent residents from Barcelona visit the delta regularly for activities like cycling, bird watching, or simply just spending time. And the areas combine beaches, natural reserves, agricultural landscapes that remain accessible for all public. So this adds another layer of value, one that is linked to the well-being and everyday connection of the natural systems. Um, Over the recent years, this connection has also led to the emergence of active local communities, environmental organizations, citizens groups, and local associations have contributed to raise the awareness and participate in conversations around conservation and land use. Their involvement reflects a shared sense of responsibility towards the territory. And yes, as we were saying, right now the Delta brings together a wide range of stakeholders from public authorities, farmers, researchers, infrastructure operators, the airport, and civil society, you know. And each of these actors interact in the territory in different ways, and their decisions are often interconnected, no?
Yeah, indeed. And let's talk a bit about the Natura 2000. You mentioned it briefly above. So we come into the very important milestone when in September, 1st September this year is a deadline for member states to come up with their natural restoration plan to European Commission. So what the situation around Natura 2000 there? Will this legislation anyhow affect the area of the Delta Llobregat? Can you share?
Yes, like Natura 2000, it plays a very important role in the Delta del Llobregat. Many parts of the Delta are included now in the Natura 2000 network. There has been proposal to broaden the Natura 2000 area in the past few years. So that really affects how certain areas in the delta are managed and then are going to be managed. No? Activities that may have significant impacts on protected habitats or species need to be carefully assessed, and land use planning must take conservation objectives into account. However, it's very important to clarify that Natura 2000 does not mean that all activities are prohibited. So in many cases, agricultural, recreation, and other economic activities can continue within the Natural 2000 areas, but are expected to be more compatible with conservation goals. For farmers and local stakeholders, it sometimes introduces additional administrative requirements or changes in land management practices. For example, water management regimes, grazing patterns, or land use decisions may need to be adapted to support habitat conservation. In the case of the Delta, Natura 2000 also reflects ecological importance of the area, particularly for bird species that depend on the wetlands during migration of breeding seasons. And at the same time, the implementation of Natura 2000 often requires balancing conservation goals with social and economic realities of the territory. So that's where the dialogue among all the stakeholders and citizens are becoming essential.
All right. Indeed, many things are ahead. And in your opinion, what actually will be happening with the Delta Llobregat area in the future? And of course, in your opinion, will it be and what will it be and what actually should be have happening there?
Well, that really depends on how different interests in the delta are able to coordinate and adapt over time. What the available evidence in recent patterns suggests is that pressures on this territory are expected to increase. Climate variability is already influencing rainfall patterns, sea levels, which can intensify risks such as flooding, drought, soil salinization. At the same time, being located next to a major metropolitan area means that demands for land infrastructure will probably continue. So rather than moving towards a fixed or stable state, the delta will likely remain a highly dynamic and managed landscape, one that requires continuous adaptation. For a more intentional perspective, the question is not only what will happen, but how we choose to respond. And here the integration becomes a key direction. This means that aligning biodiversity conservation, agriculture, water management, and urban development within a shared territorial vision, and not as separated agendas, but as interconnected parts of the same system. It is also important to clarify that this does not necessarily imply returning the delta to a past state. In many cases, what we're aiming is to maintain and, where possible, recover the ecological functions that sustain the territory while allowing human activities to continue. In practice, this will involve restoring certain degraded wetland areas, improving water management systems, and also supporting agricultural practices that contribute to soil health and biodiversity. It also points the need for governance mechanisms that facilitate coordination between different actors. In similar contexts, we've seen that these elements are addressed together, and it becomes more feasible to sustain both ecological and productive functions over time. So in that sense, the future of the Delta is not only about protecting nature, it's about maintaining the balance and functionality of the systems as a whole. So it can continue to support food production, biodiversity, flood regulation, and quality of life of the communities that are connected to it.
All right. Thanks, Rosa, for introduction. And actually, let's talk a bit what do we do now about the engaging local citizens and of course also local stakeholders. So recently we have had our public engagement event in Delta Llobregat. And by the way, we are heading ahead towards the public forum. So can you quickly introduce those activities?
Sure. So within the GoDigiBioS project, we're currently working with local stakeholders through the Delta Transformation Lab in collaboration with Minkadev, the organization I'm working with. As part of this process, one of the key components of this work is the public engagement. We are opening spaces where citizens, farmers, and local organizations and public authorities can come together to share how they are experiencing the change in the Delta and what challenges they are observing, in their day-to-day realities. What we have seen in similar processes that these conversations are not only valuable, but very necessary. Many of the challenges affecting wetlands, from water management and use, are deeply interconnected, and the decisions in one area often have implications in another. So rather than approaching this through isolated solutions in the transformation lab, what we want to do is focus more in creating conditions for dialogue, share understanding, and more informed decisions over time. So in that sense, our public forum is going to happen the 28th, and there's an open invitation for everyone to contribute, to listen, and to collectively explore this territory that continue to be both sustainable ecologically and for the community well-being.
All right. Thanks a lot, Rosa, for sharing the case of the Delta Regatta and its role in the local biodiversity ecosystem. I believe this is a perfect, great showcase of all complex challenges, which are a lot peri-urban areas all around across the Europe and all around the world as well are facing the complexity of different stakeholder clashes, what and visions, of course, how these areas can be used, and it creates a lot of challenges and threats for biodiversity in this area. So we should be better in protecting and also finding the creative government's mechanisms how to protect and defend this area, enhancing biodiversity, boosting biodiversity. And that's actually what we in GoDigiBioS is doing, and that's what I believe we are very proud about, that we are developing a very specific approach and mechanisms for enhancing protection and management of such areas, developing and piloting very specifics instruments. And in the next podcast, we will dive a bit more in the very specific approach. How do we engage very different stakeholders, finding the proper solutions which would fit everyone, which would fit also the citizens' vision of the transformation of the peri-urban areas and biodiversity there. It was my colleague, project colleague, Rosa from Minkadev. We worked together on several tasks, also implementing them in Delta Llobregat. Rosa, thank you so much for sharing insights, also sharing a case of Delta. It was a great pleasure for me also personally to dive more in that topic, and I believe for our listeners.
It's been a pleasure.
Yes, and please follow our social medias, follow our LinkedIn page, follow our YouTube, where this podcast also will be published shortly, and follow us for more. Stay tuned. Have a nice one, and See you.